we're presented with a very common scene. Jesus walks, he sits down by this well called Jacob's well, a well that is believed to have been dug and founded by the patriarch Jacob from the Old Testament. And Jesus, tired from his journey, sits down by the well. And John tells us it's noon, the hottest part of the day where one during this time of day would not do much manual labor because of the intense heat. So naturally, Jesus is tired, it's hot, and he's sitting there by the well. Nothing unusual about that. But then something strange happens. A Samaritan woman is now approaching the well to draw water from it. What's unusual about that? Well, like I said, because of the intense heat, no one did such work during the day. No one did that type of work at noon. So here she is coming by herself to draw water from this well. And so now the reader, if you're reading the story for the first time, will ask oneself, why is she coming at noon? And why is she coming by herself? And so this is where the story begins. There's 4 progressions to this story. We didn't hear all the progressions because I read the shorter version. The longer version is another page, and I'll explain what we missed in the gospel passage. So this very unusual set of events are happening. This woman by herself at noon is approaching the well. Jesus asks her the question, give me a drink, and she's taken back by that question. Again, something that's a little bit out of the ordinary during that time. Samaritans and Jews, they hated each other, and I just don't have the time to explain why that is. But just trust me on this one, that they hated each other. In fact, John says that the Jews had nothing to do with Samaritans. And on top of that, you have a man talking to the woman by themselves, which during that context, during that time, was not done. It was taboo. You just didn't do those types of things. So a Samaritan woman talking to a Jewish man, he asked her, give me a drink to quench his thirst. Now here's where the Gospel of John is just so magnificent, because John has multiple layers of meaning. So the initial layer is that Jesus is seeking to quench his thirst and seeking her help to quench his thirst. But John, when we get to Good Friday and we read the Passion narrative, we hear Jesus also utter those words on the cross, I thirst. He's looking for something much deeper than just a cup of water. He's looking for her and ultimately everyone. He's looking to enter into communion and relationship with us, beginning with this Samaritan woman. And in fact, we then move to the next phase of this conversation where Jesus then elevates the conversation. He talks about a water where when you drink this water, you will never thirst again. And she's like, well, I want that. What could that be? Again, there's a deeper level to this. The water that Jesus gives is communion and fellowship of God. And she still thinks there's some magic well out there, where she drinks from that well. She never has to come to the well again to do the fetching of water. Here's where the next phase comes in, phase 3. And this is the part that was omitted in the shorter form of the gospel. Jesus says to her, go call your husband. And she says, well, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says, you rightly so. In fact, you have had many husbands. You have 5 husbands. And the man that you're currently with right now is not your husband. Now we get the clue as to why the woman's coming by herself at noontime. She has bowed down weighed down by her conscience. She has a past that she's afraid of, and actually the current state of her life she's also very embarrassed about. Jesus, being the Son of God, knew this. It's like as if the Spirit led him to the well at that moment, knowing that he was going to encounter this woman. It's amazing how God in his grace, it just kind of appears at various points in our lives. It just shows up right when we need it the most. But she is bowed down, weighed down by her conscience. She keeps going symbolically to this well. There's a well that she keeps going to. In her case, her well is seeking human companionship in a very disordered way. That's the well she keeps going to, a well that she wants to leave behind, but she can't stop going to it. What's our well? What's the thing in life that we keep going to? We keep telling ourselves we're not going to do it. What is that well that we keep finding ourselves to because we feel we don't want to do it, but then deeper down, it's like we need it to live. Just like she needed that well to live for the water physically. But spiritually, she keeps going to a well and can't stop. But she's doing it alone. She's doing it by herself. So then Jesus moves into the fourth phase of this conversation. All of a sudden, did you notice that they're talking about water, they're talking about husbands, and then all of a sudden the conversation takes a very sharp turn into the concept and idea of worship. She explains to Jesus how the Samaritans worship at this temple on this mountain. She's pointing to it. Mount Gerizim, I believe it's called, right by Jacob's well. And Jesus says, well, no, the true worship is that was established with Moses and with David, the temple in Jerusalem. That's where he's going to be the fulfillment, the completion of. But the idea that once they move to this concept of husband and being weighed down by her conscience, we now get the final phrase in that what? Being lifted up by God's divine mercy. And I use that phrase very carefully, lifted up, the cross. The worship that we do now in spirit and in truth, as Jesus tells her, a worship that doesn't have to be in Jerusalem, but just everywhere where the Mass is said. The Son of Man is lifted up. The Son of Man is represented to us. The priest elevates the host and says, this is my body which is given up for you. He lifts up the chalice and says, this is the blood shed for the forgiveness of sins. This woman who is weighed down by our conscience, we who are weighed down by our conscience, we who keep going to wells that do not satisfy the human heart, are now lifted up by divine mercy in the words of God, this is my body, this is my blood, which is given up for you. God's divine mercy overcomes our weighed down consciences. And that's what she discovered. That's where she finally realized that, he is the one that can elevate and lift me up. Again, another detail in the story that was omitted in the shorter version, but I found very fascinating, is that she goes off to tell the people about Jesus. And what does she do? She leaves behind the bucket that she brought with her, because she doesn't need that bucket again. She doesn't need to go to that well again. She's found this source of living water, which is the Son of God in her presence, who very shortly is going to literally offer his body on the cross for the forgiveness of her sins and to give her new life. And when you have that, and you have God's divine love, and you really truly believe it, and you really believe in his divine mercy, it begins the phase where we soon realize that the things that we cling to and the wells that we go to, we don't need them anymore. But I think many of us, we're not there yet. Even though we come to Mass, when we try really hard, and when we say our prayers, we're just not there yet, but we will get there. If not in this life, in the life to come. where everything that we desire and every material thing or every desire of power and wealth and all those things, they will be cleansed, either here during our Lenten practices or in the life to come because of purgatory. Either way, our hearts will be satisfied with the one true God. When we possess him, we will no longer need our buckets again. We will no longer need our wells again, because we will be consuming and in the presence of the merciful God who will lift up our bowed down conscience, and we will never thirst again. May God bless you.